Hey guys! Tonight we're diving into a story as ancient and winding as the Nile itself. You're standing on the sun-baked banks of that mighty river, the air thick with the scent of papyrus and the distant cry of a heron. The setting sun paints the water in hues of gold and crimson, but as the light fades, a primal chill creeps up your spine. Instinctively, that beneath the placid surface, something ancient and powerful lurks, a creature perfectly evolved for its domain. You probably wouldn't last 5 minutes out here on your own. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cool to see where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported back, way back, to the dawn of ancient Egypt, long before pyramids pierced the sky or pharaohs wore their iconic crowns. Imagine life clinging precariously to the fertile ribbon of the Nile. Every sunrise brings the promise of life, sustained by the river's bounty. But every sunset reminds you of the dangers that lurk within its depths. And at the very top of that aquatic food chain, the undisputed king of the river, is the Nile crocodile. You see its eyes, just above the waterline, like two watchful, unblinking stones. You catch a glimpse of its powerful tail, scaly and immense, propelling it through the murky water with terrifying speed. This isn't some cuddly pet. This is a true apex predator, a living dinosaur, capable of snapping a grown man in half with a casual flick of its jaws. Your ancestors, the early Egyptians, knew this intimately. They saw their loved ones, their livestock, and sometimes even themselves, dragged beneath the surface, never to be seen again. So, it seems utterly counterintuitive, doesn't it? How does a creature of such terrifying power, a constant harbinger of death, transition from being the ultimate threat to a revered deity, a living embodiment of the divine, and eventually, dare we say, a beloved companion? You'd think the natural human response would be to avoid it, hunt it, or at the very least, build really, really tall fences. But no, the Egyptians, in their profound wisdom and perhaps a touch of pragmatic desperation, chose a different path. They chose veneration. Think about it from their perspective. You live in a world where the natural forces are overwhelming and unpredictable. The Nile floods annually, bringing life-giving silt but also immense destruction. The sun beats down relentlessly, a source of warmth but also a searing, drying force. And then there's the crocodile, a creature that embodies both the terrifying power and the mysterious resilience of the natural world. It survives the floods, it thrives in the heat, and it commands its domain with an effortless, ancient authority. You watch it emerge from the water, bask in the sun, and then slip back into the depths, a master of both land and water. This isn't just an animal. It's a force of nature personified, a living, breathing paradox. Early Egyptians, in their attempts to make sense of their world and perhaps exert some semblance of control over its more dangerous elements, began to associate these formidable creatures with the very essence of the Nile. The river was their lifeblood, the source of all sustenance. What if the crocodile wasn't just a monster, but a guardian? What if its power could be appeased, harnessed, or even worshipped to ensure the river's bounty and to protect against its destructive whims? It's a classic case of if you can't beat him, join him, or more accurately, if you can't beat him, build them a temple and offer them sacrifices. You can almost hear an ancient Egyptian whispering to a passing croc, "You're not going to eat me, are you, buddy? We're cool, right?" While slowly backing away. This primal fear, mingled with a grudging respect for the crocodile's immense power and its unique connection to the life-giving Nile, began to evolve into something more profound. It wasn't just about warding off attacks. It was about acknowledging a potent, perhaps divine, presence. You see, the Egyptians were master observers of nature. They noticed the crocodile's ability to survive the harsh conditions, its predatory prowess, and its deep connection to the annual flooding cycle. The flood, while dangerous, was also essential for agriculture, replenishing the fertile soil. Could the crocodile, then, be seen as an embodiment of the Nile's fertility, its creative power, even its destructive might? One mainstream historical fact that underscores this shift is the earliest evidence of crocodile worship, which dates back to the pre-dynastic period, long before the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. You find crude depictions and early cultic sites where crocodiles were clearly held in special regard, not just as animals, but as something more. This wasn't a sudden, top-down decree from a pharaoh. It was an organic development, likely emerging from local communities along the Nile who lived in constant proximity to these creatures. They witnessed the crocodile's strength, its silent patience, and its explosive power, and they began to see these qualities as divine attributes. Consider a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the crocodile's unusual habit of carrying its young in its mouth, seemingly a terrifying act, might have also contributed to its veneration. To the Egyptians, this could have been interpreted as a protective, nurturing aspect, a stark contrast to its usual predatory nature. You might think, well, that's a unique form of childcare. But in a world where life was fragile, any sign of powerful protection, even from a beast, could be seen as a blessing. It's like finding out your local mob boss occasionally bakes cookies for the neighborhood kids. It doesn't make him less intimidating, but it certainly adds a layer of unexpected complexity. As Egyptian civilization grew more complex, so too did their religious beliefs. The crocodile, with its dual nature of creation and destruction, life and death, became a potent symbol. It was a creature of the watery abyss, a master of the primeval waters from which all life was believed to have emerged. You can imagine the priests, pondering the mysteries of creation, looking at the crocodile and seeing a living link to the very beginnings of the cosmos. This gradual theological development solidified its place within the Egyptian pantheon. While we'll delve deeper into the specific deity in the next section, it's crucial to understand that the crocodile itself, as a species, became inherently sacred before it was fully embodied by a specific god. It was the living manifestation first, the divine concept second. Historians still debate the precise timeline and cultural catalysts that transformed widespread fear into widespread veneration. Was it a gradual process of appeasement turning into worship? Or did certain charismatic leaders or early cults champion the crocodile's divine status, influencing wider adoption? Perhaps it was a combination of practical necessity. To avoid being eaten, you try to make friends or at least make offerings, and the profound spiritual insights of a people deeply connected to their environment. What's clear is that by the time of the Old Kingdom, and certainly by the Middle Kingdom, the crocodile was firmly established as a creature deserving of respect, reverence, and even adoration. This wasn't just about abstract religious concepts. It began to manifest in tangible ways. You imagine early communities making offerings at riverbanks, perhaps leaving food or small effigies to appease the mighty beasts. These acts, born of fear and respect, slowly evolved into more formal rituals. As the veneration deepened, the idea emerged that certain crocodiles, perhaps those displaying particular characteristics or residing in specific sacred locations, were not just symbols, but living embodiments of the divine. This is where the concept of the beloved companion starts to subtly weave its way into the narrative. It's not that you'd invite a wild crocodile into your living room for a game of fetch, unless you had a serious death wish, but rather that certain chosen individuals of the species were treated with an extraordinary level of care and reverence, elevated far beyond the status of a mere animal. They became living gods, and as such were afforded a level of attention and dedication that would astound you. The journey from formidable apex predator to revered deity and then to a sacred, almost companion-like entity within the temple walls is a testament to the unique and complex worldview of the ancient Egyptians. They didn't just survive alongside nature. They integrated it into the very fabric of their spiritual and daily lives. You drift now, not along the shimmering surface of the Nile, but deeper, into the very currents of ancient Egyptian belief. You feel the cool, primeval waters swirling around you, carrying whispers of creation and raw power. For you see, the reverence for crocodiles wasn't just some quaint affection for a scaly friend. It was deeply, profoundly rooted in the divine. And at the heart of that reverence, like a powerful, silent sentinel, stands Sobek, the crocodile god. Imagine, if you will, the sheer, visceral impact of encountering a full-grown Nile crocodile. Its ancient eyes, its powerful tail, the chilling glint of its teeth. It's a creature of immense strength, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Now, imagine assigning that power, that primal force, a consciousness, a will, a connection to the very lifeblood of your civilization. That's Sobek. He's not just a god who happens to be a crocodile. He is the crocodile elevated to divinity. You picture him now, perhaps in your mind's eye, a being with the robust, muscular body of a man, often adorned with a kilt and a sun disk atop his head, but crowned unmistakably by the long, powerful snout and keen eyes of a crocodile. It's a striking image, isn't it? A fusion of the human and the untamed, a perfect visual metaphor for the Egyptians' relationship with their environment. They didn't just fear the crocodile. They sought to understand it, to harness its power, to transform its danger into protection, its ferocity into fertility. Sobek, you understand, was born of the waters, just as the crocodiles themselves emerged from the Nile. In some myths, he is said to have sprung from the primeval waters of Nun, the vast, chaotic ocean that existed before creation. He is the very essence of the Nile's life-giving yet unpredictable nature. He's the god of the river, of its floods, and of the rich, fertile silt it leaves behind, which was, let's be honest, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of winning the agricultural lottery. Without that annual inundation, life as they knew it simply wouldn't exist. So Sobek wasn't just a god, he was, in many ways, an existential necessity. He was the reason your crops grew, the reason your land was fertile, the reason you didn't starve. Talk about pressure, right? Imagine having that on your divine resume. His very name, Sobek, is believed by some scholars to be derived from an Egyptian word meaning to impregnate or to make fertile, a direct nod to his connection with the Nile's life-giving properties. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some myths even suggest that the Nile itself was formed from Sobek's sweat. Yes, you heard that right, his sweat. So, next time you dip your toes into a river, just imagine the divine perspiration that might have gone into it. Suddenly, that refreshing dip takes on a whole new, slightly sticky meaning. Now, Sobek is a complex character, a bit like that friend who's super helpful but also has a bit of a temper. He embodies both the creative and destructive aspects of the Nile. On one hand, he's a protector, a healer, a god who could grant strength and fertility. People prayed to him for protection from the very creatures he embodied, the crocodiles themselves, as well as for safe passage on the Nile and for successful childbirth. You can imagine the scene. A hopeful mother-to-be, perhaps offering a small figurine or a prayer, hoping that Sobek, the mighty crocodile, would ensure a smooth delivery. It's a bit like praying to a lion for protection from other lions. Isn't it? A fascinating paradox. But then there's his other side, the raw, untamed power of the predator. Sobek was also associated with aggression, with the sudden, brutal force of a crocodile attack. He could be fierce, unpredictable, and certainly not a deity you'd want to cross. This duality is central to understanding him. He wasn't just a cuddly pet god. He was a god who demanded respect, a god whose power could be both beneficent and terrifying. It's a bit like trying to decide if your cat is a purring cuddle monster or a tiny, furry assassin. With Sobek, you always knew he could be both. Historians still argue whether Sobek's more aggressive aspects were genuinely revered or simply tolerated as a necessary evil for a god of such power. Was his ferocity seen as a positive attribute, a symbol of strength and dominance, or was it a concession, a way to appease the wild nature of the Nile and its most feared inhabitant? You contemplate this as you hear the imagined splash of a tail, a low, guttural rumble that could be either a warning or a greeting. His worship was widespread, particularly in areas where crocodiles were prevalent, which, let's be honest, was most of Egypt along the Nile. But his primary cult center was a city known to the Greeks as Crocodilopolis, Crocodile City, located in the Fayum oasis. Today, we know it as Medinet El Fayum. Here, you could almost smell the musky scent of the lake, feel the humidity in the air, a constant reminder of Sobek's domain. It was here that his worship truly flourished, where temples were dedicated solely to him, and where, As we'll delve into later, living crocodiles were kept as sacred manifestations of the god himself. Imagine walking through the bustling streets, hearing the distant calls of vendors, and knowing, just beyond the temple walls, a living god was resting in its sacred pool. It must have been a truly immersive experience, a blending of the mundane and the miraculous. Another significant center of his worship was Ombo, further south along the Nile. Here you find a unique double temple, dedicated to two gods, Sobek and Horus the Elder. This duality is quite striking, isn't it? One side for the powerful, unpredictable crocodile god, and the other for the sky god, often depicted as a falcon. It's like a divine power-sharing agreement, or maybe a celestial roommate situation where one prefers quiet contemplation and the other enjoys the occasional dramatic splash. You can almost hear the ancient priests debating whose turn it was to clean the divine pool. Sobek's influence wasn't confined to the fearsome or Ombo. He was integrated into various mythological cycles. Sometimes he was seen as a son of Neith, the ancient mother goddess, linking him to the very origins of creation. At other times, he was associated with Ra, the sun god, taking on aspects of solar power, often depicted with the sun disk above his head. This syncretism, this blending of deities, was common in ancient Egypt, a way to weave a complex tapestry of belief where different gods could represent different facets of the same cosmic order. It's like a divine shared universe, long before Marvel came along. You lean back, feeling the gentle hum of ancient reverence, the quiet awe that must have permeated the air around Sobek's temples. The Egyptians understood that life, especially along the Nile, was a delicate balance. The river brought life, but it also harbored danger. Sobek, the crocodile god, was the personification of this paradox. He was the force that could drag you under, but also the power that ensured the very existence of your world. He was the primal, untamed spirit of the Nile, a god of immense power, both feared and cherished, a protector whose very form reminded you of the wild, beautiful, and utterly dangerous world you inhabited. His majesty wasn't just in his divine status, but in his raw, undeniable connection to the life and death of Egypt itself. You settle deeper into your softest blanket, the kind that feels like a cloud hugging you, and you can almost hear the gentle murmur of the Nile, even though you're miles and millennia away. You've just learned how the fearsome crocodile, the very embodiment of the river's wild power, became entwined with the majestic god Sobek. But now, you need to understand something even more profound, something that twists your modern brain into a delightful little pretzel. These weren't just pets. Oh no, not in the way you think of your fluffy cat or your slobbery dog. These were living, breathing, scaly extensions of the divine itself. You have to imagine a world where the line between animal and deity was beautifully, sometimes terrifyingly, blurred. It's not like you just picked up a baby croc from the riverbank, named him Chompers, and taught him to roll over for belly rubs. Though, let's be real, a crocodile doing a rollover would be the most epic viral video of all time, wouldn't it? Just imagine the internet breaking. Instead, certain crocodiles, from the moment they were tiny hatchlings, were identified, selected, and treated with a reverence that elevated them far beyond mere creatures. They weren't just representatives of Sobek. They were seen, in a very real and tangible sense, as manifestations of the god, living embodiments of his power and presence on earth. You might be thinking, wait, so they believed a crocodile was a god? And that's where it gets wonderfully complex and deeply Egyptian. It wasn't always a literal one-to-one identity, like Sobek suddenly decided to put on a crocodile suit for the day. Instead, think of it more like a conduit, a vessel, a living shrine. The divine essence of Sobek was believed to reside within these specific, chosen reptiles. They were living, breathing icons, walking, or rather, slithering proof that the gods were among them, watching, listening, and occasionally, perhaps, accepting a nice fish snack. You can almost feel the hush that would fall over a crowd when one of these sacred crocodilians was brought forth. It wasn't just observing an animal. It was witnessing a miracle. You'd stand there, perhaps a little nervously, as this ancient reptile, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, moved with an almost regal slowness. Every flicker of its tail, every blink of its nictitating membrane, was imbued with spiritual significance. It was like having a direct line to the divine, a living, scaly prayer answering machine. This belief wasn't just a quaint custom. It was a cornerstone of their religious practice, particularly in cult centers like Crocodilopolis, or Shidet as it was known to the Egyptians, located in the Fayum oasis. Here, the worship of Sobek reached its zenith, and the sacred crocodiles were the very heart of the temple. You wouldn't just go to the temple to pray to a statue. You'd go to pray to the living God, who might just be basking in a specially constructed pool, perhaps dreaming of a particularly tasty gazelle. It put a whole new spin on church attendance, didn't it? Imagine trying to get your kids to behave during a sermon with a giant, potentially hungry reptile just a few feet away. No running deer, or Sobek might get peckish. The sheer scale of this practice is a mainstream historical fact that continues to astound archaeologists. Thousands upon thousands of crocodiles were mummified and buried, attesting to the widespread and enduring nature of this cult. It wasn't just a fad. It was a multi-millennial commitment to their scaly deities. You really have to give them credit for their dedication. Most people struggle to keep a houseplant alive for a year, and these folks were maintaining entire divine reptile populations for centuries. Now, here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some historical accounts suggest that these sacred crocodiles were so tame, or at least so accustomed to human interaction, that priests would even adorn them with elaborate jewelry. Imagine a giant, scaly fashionista, dripping in gold and semi-precious stones, just lounging by the water. It's a truly bizarre and fascinating image, isn't it? You can almost hear the priests debating, does this emerald necklace bring out his eyes? Or is the sapphire collar more befitting a god of his stature? It makes you wonder if the crocodiles had favorite pieces, or if they just tolerated the bling for the sake of divine appearances. Oh, another anklet? Really, guys? I just wanted a nap. The profound spiritual significance meant that these crocodiles weren't just fed and housed. They were revered, consulted, and believed to possess oracular powers. You might approach the temple, laden with offerings, seeking guidance from the living God. Perhaps you wanted to know if your crops would be bountiful, or if your brother-in-law would finally pay back that loan. The priests would interpret the crocodile's movements, its stillness, even its refusal to eat, as divine messages. It's a bit like trying to read your cat's mind, except the stakes were infinitely higher, and your cat probably won't eat your arm if you misinterpret its meows. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians believed the god Sobek literally inhabited a particular crocodile's body, or if the crocodile was merely a potent symbol or a living statue through which the god's presence was felt. Was it a constant, full-time divine residency, or more like a spiritual Airbnb, where Sobek popped in for special occasions? The truth probably lies somewhere in the nuanced tapestry of ancient Egyptian belief, which often embraced multiple, sometimes seemingly contradictory, ideas simultaneously. They were perfectly comfortable with a bit of spiritual ambiguity, unlike us modern folks who need everything neatly categorized and labeled. You begin to appreciate the immense responsibility that fell upon the priests tasked with caring for these living gods. This wasn't just a job. It was a sacred duty of the highest order. Every interaction, every offering, every moment spent in the presence of these creatures was a ritual, a profound act of devotion. You weren't just cleaning out a pond. You were maintaining the sanctity of a divine dwelling. You weren't just tossing in a fish. You were presenting a sacred offering to a living deity. It certainly puts your own pet care routine into perspective, doesn't it? Imagine forgetting to feed your sacred crocodile one morning. The divine wrath would probably be a bit more intense than a grumpy meow from your cat. So, as you drift deeper into this ancient world, remember that these aren't just stories of exotic pets. They are tales of deep spiritual connection, of a people who saw the divine not just in the heavens, but in the powerful, scaly creatures that inhabited their life-giving river. They were more than just pets. They were living embodiments of power, protection, and the mysterious forces of creation. And now you're ready to learn where these revered reptiles lived. You find yourself drifting, not through the swirling sands of time, but perhaps through the gentle, sleep-inducing currents of the Nile itself, as we arrive at a truly fascinating aspect of ancient Egyptian devotion: the specialized environments created for their sacred crocodilians. Imagine, if you will, not just a dusty enclosure, but a sanctuary, a watery haven meticulously crafted within the very heart of a temple complex. This isn't your average backyard pond, mind you, unless your backyard pond is fed by a sacred river and houses a living god. You step, or rather, float gently, past towering pylons, their hieroglyphs whispering stories of pharaohs and deities, and the air grows cooler, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp stone and fresh water. The bright, relentless Egyptian sun, usually so eager to assert its dominance, is softened here, filtered by high temple walls and the occasional rustle of palm fronds. You're not just visiting a temple, you're entering a meticulously designed ecosystem, a sacred habitat where the divine literally took a dip. At the core of many temples dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile god, you would discover what the Egyptians called a sacred lake or a sacred pool. These weren't just decorative water features, like that slightly too small fountain your neighbor keeps trying to make work in their front yard. Oh no, these were purpose-built aquatic environments, often rectangular or L-shaped, dug deep into the temple's bedrock and lined with carefully cut stone. Think of it less as a pond and more as a luxury resort pool for creatures with surprisingly sharp teeth and an ancient lineage. The engineering behind these sacred lakes was, frankly, quite impressive. They weren't simply filled with buckets of water from the Nile. Instead, many were connected directly to the great river itself via underground channels, or callets, allowing fresh water to constantly flow in and out, mimicking the natural ebb and flow of a riverbank. This ensured the water remained clean and oxygenated, a crucial detail for keeping a large, scaly deity happy and healthy. It was, in essence, an ancient, self-flushing toilet system, but for crocodiles, and with far more spiritual significance. You might even hear the gentle gurgle of the incoming water, a soft lullaby for the drowsy creatures within. As you gaze into the clear, shimmering water, you might notice the meticulous details. The edges of the lake would often be sloped, allowing the crocodiles to easily bask on the sunny stone banks, much like a modern-day sunbather at a resort, albeit one who prefers a diet of sacrificed meat. Some lakes even featured small, artificial islands or submerged ledges, providing varied terrain for the resident reptiles. It was a 5-star accommodation, complete with all the amenities a discerning crocodile could desire, except perhaps for a minibar stocked with gazelle jerky. The most famous example of such a temple, and a mainstream historical fact you absolutely must know, is the Temple of Ombo, perched majestically on a bend in the Nile. This unique double temple was dedicated to 2 deities, Sobek, the crocodile god, and Horus the elder. And true to its dedication, it featured a genuine, honest-to-goodness sacred lake right within its precincts. You can still see the remnants of the well and the underground passage that once brought the Nile's lifeblood directly into the temple's sacred pool, a testament to the Egyptians' ingenuity and their commitment to their scaly residents. It was like having your own private beach, but instead of worrying about sand in your swimsuit, you worried about being mistaken for a particularly slow-moving snack. These sacred lakes weren't just functional. They were deeply symbolic. They represented the primeval waters of creation, the very essence from which all life, including the gods, emerged. By housing living crocodiles, embodiments of Sobek, within these sacred waters, the Egyptians were, in a way, bringing the divine essence of creation directly into their temples. It was a constant, tangible connection to the spiritual realm, a living, breathing testament to their faith. You can almost feel the ancient reverence emanating from the placid surface of the water, a stillness that belies the powerful creatures slumbering beneath. The priests, who were the primary caregivers for these sacred crocodilians, spent countless hours around these lakes. They weren't just maintaining a glorified fish tank. They were tending to a living deity. You might imagine them, robed and serene, observing the crocodiles, ensuring the water was clean, and preparing for the elaborate feeding rituals that would take place beside these very pools. The air would sometimes carry the faint scent of incense, mingling with the earthy aroma of the water, creating an atmosphere that was both reverent and strangely primal. Now, here's a quirky tidbit that might make you chuckle. While most temples had one sacred lake, some archaeologists have theorized that certain larger complexes might have had multiple pools or interconnected water systems, perhaps even for different classes of sacred crocodiles, or perhaps just to give the bigger ones their own personal space away from the rambunctious youngsters. Imagine the ancient Egyptian version of a teen zone at a water park, but for baby crocs. It's a fun thought, isn't it? Though, historians still argue whether these separate pools were purely for practical purposes, or if there was a deeper, ritualistic significance to segregating the sacred reptiles by age or size. Was it an exclusive VIP lounge for the truly ancient crocs? We can only speculate, but it paints a picture of a surprisingly sophisticated approach to animal husbandry. The security of these sacred havens was also paramount. High walls, often thick and impenetrable, surrounded the temple complexes, keeping both unwanted visitors out and, more importantly, keeping the sacred crocodiles in. You wouldn't want your living god wandering off to, say, the local marketplace for a spontaneous snack run, would you? The enclosures were designed to be escape-proof, a testament to the sheer power and potential danger of their revered residents. It reminds you of trying to keep a particularly mischievous toddler contained, but with significantly higher stakes and more scales involved. As you mentally float above these ancient temple havens, you can truly appreciate the scale of devotion. These were not mere animal pens. They were meticulously engineered, spiritually charged environments, a testament to the profound respect and awe the ancient Egyptians held for these formidable reptiles. Every stone, every channel of water, every sun-drenched bank was designed with the comfort and divine status of the sacred crocodile in mind. It was a world where the line between the wild and the divine blurred, where the apex predator of the Nile was welcomed into the very heart of human civilization, given a luxurious watery home, and revered as a living embodiment of a powerful god. And all within the serene, ancient walls of a temple, where the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water and the soft rustle of eternity. You stand on the muddy banks of the Nile, the relentless Egyptian sun beating down on your linen-clad shoulders. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth, papyrus, and something distinctly reptilian. A gentle breeze, if you can even call it that, rustles the tall reeds, providing little respite from the oppressive heat. You squint, scanning the water's edge, not for a fully grown, terrifying apex predator, not yet, anyway, but for something far smaller, far more vulnerable, and yet destined for immense power. You are here to witness the delicate, dangerous, and deeply spiritual process of selecting the future divine charges of the ancient Egyptian temples. Imagine, if you will, the scene. It's not like picking out a puppy from a litter, though the stakes are arguably much, much higher. You're not looking for the one with the floppiest ears or the waggiest tail. Oh no, you're looking for a tiny, scaly creature that, even at birth, possesses an inherent, almost tangible connection to the divine. It's a job requiring immense patience, acute observation, and a healthy dose of courage, because even baby crocodiles come with a built-in set of very sharp intentions. The priests, clad in their pristine white robes, move with a hushed reverence that seems almost out of place given the lurking dangers. They aren't just animal handlers. They are spiritual custodians, tasked with identifying and nurturing the living embodiments of Sobek himself. Their mission is to find the perfect candidates from the countless nests scattered along the Nile's fertile banks. This isn't a random snatch and grab. It's a precise, ritualistic undertaking, steeped in tradition and profound belief. You notice a small, almost imperceptible mound of sand and decaying vegetation near the water's edge. This, you realize, is a crocodile nest. Female crocodiles are surprisingly diligent mothers, at least when it comes to laying their eggs and covering them up. She'll lay anywhere from 20 to 80 eggs, burying them carefully to protect them from predators and regulate their temperature. This is a mainstream historical fact that still fascinates biologists today. The temperature of the nest often determines the sex of the hatchlings, a phenomenon known as temperature-dependent sex determination. Cooler temperatures tend to produce females, while warmer temperatures yield males. So, you can see why finding the right nest at the right stage was critical. The priests aren't just looking for any nest, mind you. They are seeking signs, omens, perhaps even a subtle shift in the energy of the air around a particular spot. It's not simply about finding a clutch of eggs. It's about discerning which eggs, or rather, which hatchlings, are truly blessed by Sobek. You might wonder if they had a checklist. Must be healthy? Check. Must not try to bite off my finger immediately? Bonus. But it was far more nuanced than that. The ideal candidates were almost always newly hatched. Why? Because a tiny, finger-sized crocodile is infinitely more manageable than a grumpy juvenile, let alone a fully grown adult who's decided your leg looks like a tasty snack. More importantly, selecting them at such a tender age allowed the priests to imprint upon them, to raise them within the sacred confines of the temple from their very first moments. This early intervention was believed to foster their divine connection, ensuring they grew up not just as crocodiles, but as living extensions of the god. It's a bit like adopting a very unique, scaly newborn and raising it to be a spiritual leader, except the spiritual leader might eventually grow to weigh a ton and have 80 teeth. The process of extraction was, naturally, fraught with peril. While the mother crocodile might not be actively guarding the nest 24/7 after laying, she's never far. You can practically feel her watchful gaze from somewhere in the murky depths, a silent, ancient warning. The priests would approach with extreme caution, often performing small rituals and offerings to Sobek beforehand, seeking his protection and blessing for their task. It was a delicate dance between reverence and risk management. Imagine trying to collect a basket of very wriggly, very bitey babies while their protective mother, who weighs more than a small car, is lurking just out of sight. It certainly puts modern-day childcare struggles into perspective, doesn't it? Once a nest was deemed suitable, and the eggs had begun to hatch, the real selection began. The priests would carefully, almost gingerly, gather the tiny hatchlings. They weren't looking for the biggest or the most aggressive. In fact, perhaps quite the opposite. Some fringe theories suggest they looked for specific, subtle markings on the scales, or unusual eye colors, believing these to be divine birthmarks. One quirky tidbit posits that they might have even listened for a particular chirping sound from certain hatchlings, believing it to be a unique blessing from Sobek himself. While this is debated, it speaks to the meticulous detail and spiritual depth they applied to the selection process. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians actively bred crocodiles for these sacred roles, or if they solely relied on collecting wild hatchlings. While there's evidence of enclosures and ponds within temple complexes that could have facilitated breeding, the primary focus seems to have been on selecting from naturally occurring nests. The sheer number of mummified crocodiles found suggests a continuous, large-scale supply was needed, which might point to a combination of both methods, or perhaps even specialized crocodile farms near temple cities like Crocodilopolis, modern-day Fayum, a city utterly devoted to Sobek. The chosen hatchlings were gently placed into special, water-filled containers, often lined with soft papyrus or reeds, to ensure their comfort and safety during transport back to the temple. This wasn't just about survival. It was about beginning their journey as sacred beings. Each tiny movement, each flick of a tail was observed and interpreted. Were they calm? Did they seem to accept their human handlers? These weren't pets in the modern sense. They were living vessels of a god, and their initial disposition was seen as deeply significant. Upon arrival at the temple, the selection process wasn't entirely over. The newly arrived divine charges would undergo further observation and perhaps even minor rituals to formally induct them into their sacred roles. They would be introduced to their new, purpose-built homes, often small, clean pools designed to mimic their natural habitat but with controlled environments. This was their nursery, their sanctuary, and the beginning of a life utterly unlike that of their wild siblings. They were no longer just crocodiles. They were the embodiment of Sobek, chosen by man and, they believed, by the god himself, for a life of reverence, luxury, and ultimately eternal preservation. And so, the journey of a sacred crocodile, from tiny hatchling to revered deity, truly began. You stand on the sun-baked flagstones, the early morning light casting long, thin shadows across the temple courtyard. The air, thick with the scent of stagnant water and something vaguely earthy, hints at the sacred lake just beyond the colonnade. You can almost feel the humidity clinging to your skin, a familiar embrace in this ancient land. This isn't just any lake. It's the hallowed domain of the Nile's living gods, the sacred crocodilians, and you're here to witness their daily breakfast, which, let's be honest, is probably more gourmet than your own. A hush falls over the temple grounds as a procession of priests emerges from a shadowed doorway. Their linen robes, crisp and white, rustle softly as they move, their bare feet making almost no sound on the warm stone. You notice the focused intensity in their eyes, a blend of reverence and meticulous attention to detail. This isn't a chore for them. It's a sacred duty, a profound act of devotion. They carry woven baskets, their contents hidden from your immediate view, and clay bowls that clink ever so gently, adding to the almost hypnotic rhythm of their approach. Imagine having a job where your entire daily routine revolved around ensuring a giant reptile was well-fed and happy. It certainly puts "fetch the kibble" into perspective, doesn't it? As they draw closer to the water's edge, you catch the first scent of the day's main course, fresh fish. The Nile, ever generous, provided an abundant larder. You see large, glistening tilapia and perch, their scales still reflecting the morning sun, carefully laid out in the baskets. These weren't just any fish. They were often caught specifically for the temple's divine residents, perhaps even blessed before being brought to the temple. It's a mainstream historical fact, supported by archaeological findings and ancient texts, that fish formed a primary component of the sacred crocodile's diet, often supplemented with other meats. No wonder these crocs grew to such impressive sizes. They were basically living off a 5-star all-you-can-eat buffet. The priests arranged themselves along the bank of the sacred lake, their movements deliberate and unhurried. One priest, older than the others, raises his hands, murmuring incantations that drift over the water, a soft, rhythmic hum that seems to ripple through the air. You watch as the water stirs, almost imperceptibly at first. A dark shape, then another, begins to glide silently towards the bank. These aren't wild, aggressive beasts, though their power is undeniable. They are accustomed to this daily ritual, perhaps even anticipating it with a reptilian patience that borders on serene. Then comes the moment of offering. With precise, almost balletic movements, the priests begin to present the food. Some fish are gently placed at the water's edge, while others are tossed in with a practiced arc, splashing lightly as they hit the surface. You hear the soft plop of fish entering the water, followed by the almost imperceptible whoosh as a massive jaw breaks the surface, snapping shut with astonishing speed. There's no frantic struggle, no chaotic feeding frenzy. It's a measured, almost elegant consumption, befitting a god. The crocodiles, in their slow, deliberate movements, seem to acknowledge the offering, their ancient eyes, like polished obsidian, fixed on the priests. It's a peculiar dance between man and beast, reverence and instinct. But it wasn't just fish on the menu. These sacred crocodilians received a remarkably varied and often luxurious diet. Beyond the daily catch, you might see priests offering choice cuts of meat, perhaps from sacrificial animals, though certainly not live ones, given the PG-13 rating of this story, or even specially prepared fowl. Imagine being a priest, meticulously selecting the plumpest pigeon for your scaly charge. It's a level of dedication that makes you wonder if they had tiny chef hats. You might even observe them presenting bowls of milk, a curious offering for a reptile, or loaves of bread, perhaps sweetened with honey. These weren't just about nutrition. They were profound offerings, acts of veneration. Historians still argue whether these non-meat offerings, like milk and bread, were primarily consumed by the crocodiles or if they held a more symbolic, ritualistic purpose, perhaps poured into the lake as a libation rather than directly ingested. It's a fascinating debate, pondering the dietary preferences of divine reptiles. The sensory details of these feeding rituals are surprisingly subtle yet profound. Beyond the splash of fish and the soft rustle of robes, you might pick up the low gurgle of water as a crocodile submerges, or the faint, almost imperceptible thump as its heavy body shifts on the sandy bank. The air around you is thick with reverence, almost palpable. The priests don't just feed. They minister. They watch, they observe, they ensure each sacred charge is receiving its due. It's a full-time job, probably with excellent benefits, assuming you enjoy the company of large, toothy reptiles. One particularly quirky tidbit that has emerged from archaeological studies involves the discovery of various non-food items within the mummified remains of some crocodiles. While most stomach contents point to a diet of fish and other animals, some crocodiles were found to have ingested small, votive offerings, like tiny amulets or beads. Whether these were accidentally swallowed during feeding rituals or deliberately offered in a way that encouraged ingestion remains a subject of scholarly curiosity. Perhaps it was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of leaving a little trinket in your pet's food bowl, just to show extra love? Or maybe the crocodiles were just not picky eaters when it came to shiny objects. The daily nourishment wasn't a quick drop-and-go affair. It was a sustained interaction, a period of close communion between the priests and the living embodiment of Sobek. You can imagine the priests, in their quiet devotion, learning the subtle behaviors of each crocodile, recognizing their individual quirks, perhaps even giving them names, though those names are lost to time. It's a remarkable parallel to how we care for our own pets today, albeit on a much grander, more spiritual scale with far more teeth involved. As the sun climbs higher, and the last of the offerings have been consumed or accepted, the crocodiles slowly retreat back into the cooler depths of the sacred lake, leaving only ripples on the surface. The priests, with a final, reverent bow towards the water, gather their empty baskets and bowls. The air feels lighter now, the ritual complete. It's a testament to the ancient Egyptians' profound respect for the natural world and their unique ability to elevate its creatures to the divine. For them, feeding these formidable reptiles wasn't just about sustenance. It was about honoring the divine presence within them, ensuring the continued favor of Sobek, and maintaining the delicate balance between the earthly and the sacred. You drift into the humid air of the temple complex, the faint, earthy scent of Nile water mingling with something richer, something almost meaty. Your ears, attuned to the gentle hum of the ancient world, pick up the low murmur of priestly incantations, a rhythmic drone that promises not just spiritual solace, but perhaps a very lavish meal. You're stepping into the dining room, if you will, of the most revered residents of the temple, the sacred crocodiles, and their menu was, frankly, far better than yours on most Tuesday nights. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer logistics of feeding a creature that could grow to be 20 feet long, a living embodiment of a god, with an appetite to match its divine status. This wasn't just throwing a few scraps into the water. Oh no, this was a meticulously planned, almost theatrical, daily repast. You observe the priests, their linen robes crisp even in the warmth, moving with a deliberate grace that suggests every action is a ritual in itself. And indeed it is. The food they carry isn't just sustenance. It's an offering, a continuation of the veneration shown to Sobek himself. The centerpiece of this reptilian banquet, as you might expect, is fresh fish. The Nile, ever generous, provided an endless bounty. You see baskets overflowing with glistening tilapia, plump Nile perch, and various other species, their scales catching the diffused light of the temple courtyard. These aren't the rejects from the market. These are prime specimens caught that very morning, perhaps even from the temple's own fishing grounds or supplied directly by royal decree. Think of it as the freshest seafood delivery service, but instead of a scooter, it's a procession of barefoot priests. But the diet of a divine crocodile wasn't limited to just fish, glorious as it was. Oh no, these weren't your average, run-of-the-mill, fish and chips-loving reptiles. Their palates, or at least their priests' understanding of their divine preferences, demanded more. You might see plump ducks and geese, specially raised on temple estates, their feathers still vibrant before their ultimate, sacred purpose. Sometimes, even cuts of beef or other domesticated animals, slaughtered for various temple rituals, would find their way into the crocodile's diet. This wasn't just about nutrition. It was about status, about offering the best of the best to the living gods. It's like feeding your goldfish caviar and prime rib, if your goldfish could also, snap your arm off. The concept of sacrificial meats is particularly fascinating here. In ancient Egypt, the act of sacrifice was central to religious practice. Animals were offered to deities as a form of communication, a way to gain favor, or to express gratitude. Once an animal was sacrificed to a god, its essence, its ba, was believed to ascend to the divine realm. However, the physical body of the animal often remained. And here's where our scaly friends came in. A significant portion of these sacrificial offerings, especially those made to Sobek, would be meticulously prepared and presented to the sacred crocodiles. You watch as a priest, with painstaking care, carves a portion of a freshly sacrificed bull, perhaps an offering made to Sobek himself earlier that day, and lays it reverently on a reed mat. This isn't just food. It's a direct link to the divine, a tangible manifestation of the god's acceptance of the offering. It's the ultimate leftover, if you will, but with a spiritual twist. This practice highlights a mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian religion: the interconnectedness of sacred animals, divine offerings, and the temple economy. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were vast economic entities, managing land, livestock, and labor. The sustenance of the sacred animals, therefore, was intrinsically linked to the temple's agricultural output and the flow of offerings from the populace and the pharaoh. The best produced, the finest animals were always earmarked for the divine, and by extension, for the creatures that served as their earthly conduits. The priests, you notice, don't just toss the food in. There's a solemnity, a precision to their movements. They might cleanse the meat with water from a sacred basin, or sprinkle it with incense. Prayers and blessings are undoubtedly murmured, ensuring the offering is pure and acceptable. It's a full-service dining experience for these reptilian royalty. You can almost hear the soft splash as a large piece of meat lands gently on the water's surface, followed by the ripple of movement as a massive form glides silently towards its meal. There's no frantic tearing, no messy scramble. Often, it's a slow, deliberate consumption, befitting a god. One quirky tidbit you might not expect is that some accounts suggest these sacred crocodiles were occasionally offered not just raw meat, but also things like bread, milk, and even honey. Imagine a crocodile, usually associated with raw power and primal instinct, gently lapping up a bowl of milk or accepting a piece of honey-drenched bread. It paints a surprisingly tender picture, suggesting a deeper level of interaction and perhaps even an attempt to civilize or domesticate the divine beast in the eyes of its caretakers. It's like teaching your pet T-Rex to eat vegetables. Admirable, if a little terrifying to imagine. Historians still argue whether the quantity of food provided was always purely based on the crocodile's biological needs, or if it was often an ostentatious display of wealth and devotion. Were these creatures truly overfed, pampered to an extreme, or was the apparent luxury simply a reflection of their enormous size and the immense energy required for such a powerful predator? The truth, as often is the case, likely lies somewhere in the middle. They certainly wouldn't have been going hungry. The priests, who you might think of as glorified zookeepers, were far more than that. They were intermediaries, servants of the divine, and their role in providing the royal diet was a sacred duty. They understood the nuances of crocodile behavior, learning to approach these formidable creatures with respect and caution, a balance between reverence and self-preservation. You can almost feel the weight of their responsibility, the daily commitment to ensuring that the living embodiment of Sobek was content, well-fed, and therefore benevolent. It's a job description that would make even the most dedicated pet owner pause. Must be comfortable with large, toothy reptiles. Experience with ritualistic offerings a plus. Danger of being eaten, minimal but non-zero. The specific diets weren't just about luxury. They were about maintaining the health and vitality of these sacred charges. A healthy, robust crocodile was a sign of Sobek's favor, a testament to the temple's dedication. Any sign of illness or weakness would have been a cause for great concern and immediate priestly intervention. They were, in essence, the ultimate food critics, whose reviews were delivered with a powerful snap of the jaws. As you slowly withdraw from the feeding area, the scent of fish and damp earth begins to fade, replaced by the lingering aroma of incense. You carry with you the image of meticulous care, of offerings fit for a king or rather, a god, and the profound dedication of those who served these ancient world's most unusual and revered pets. The daily meal wasn't just about sustenance. It was a profound act of worship, a tangible thread connecting humanity to the mighty, scaly embodiment of the divine. Now, as you drift a little deeper into the ancient world, imagine yourself stepping through the towering pylon gates of an Egyptian temple, not one dedicated to the usual suspects like Ra or Osiris, but one where the very air thrums with the presence of something ancient, scaled, and utterly revered. We're talking about the temple environments designed to house the living embodiments of Sobek himself, the sacred crocodiles. This wasn't just about throwing a few fish into a muddy pond. Oh no, this was state-of-the-art reptilian real estate, ancient Egyptian style. You find yourself in a vast, open courtyard, the blazing sun tempered by the cool stone underfoot. But your gaze isn't drawn to hieroglyph-covered walls or colossal statues. Instead, it's pulled toward a large, shimmering body of water, meticulously crafted, not unlike a very, very grand swimming pool. If your swimming pool also contained a creature capable of a death roll. These weren't just random puddles. These were purpose-built aquatic palaces, designed for creatures that were both formidable predators and cherished deities. Think of it as the ultimate luxury resort, but for reptiles with existential responsibilities. The primary feature of these sacred abodes was, of course, the water itself. Often, these were artificial lakes or large, deep ponds, sometimes fed directly by the Nile or by underground channels, ensuring a constant supply of fresh, flowing water. You can almost hear the gentle lapping against the stone banks, a soothing sound that would have accompanied the temple rituals. The water wasn't just for swimming. It was their sanctuary, their hunting ground, for the offerings, of course, and their cool refuge from the relentless Egyptian sun. Imagine the sheer engineering feat involved in maintaining such a large body of water within a temple complex thousands of years ago. It makes your modern pool pump look like a child's toy, doesn't it? These sacred lakes weren't uniform in depth. They typically featured varying levels, mimicking a natural riverbank. You'd see shallower areas where the crocodiles could bask and warm themselves after a dip, and deeper sections where they could submerge completely, perhaps to digest a particularly lavish meal of, say, a freshly sacrificed gazelle. The edges were often sloped, providing easy access in and out of the water, and constructed from smooth, dressed stone to prevent injury to their precious scaly hides. It's almost like they had a spa day every day. And unlike your bathtub, which probably just has a rubber ducky for company, these pools hosted literal living gods. Security, naturally, was paramount. While these creatures were divine, they were still crocodiles, apex predators with very sharp teeth and an undeniable instinct for personal space. The enclosures were typically surrounded by high, sturdy walls, often several meters tall, made of thick mud brick or stone. These walls weren't just for containment. They also served to create a sense of sacred privacy, shielding the divine residents from casual gawkers and ensuring that only the initiated priests could approach. You wouldn't want just anyone walking up and trying to pet a sacred crocodile, would you? That's just asking for a bad day, no matter how divine the animal is. Within these secure perimeters, you'd find more than just water. There were often sandy banks or raised platforms of stone, offering prime basking spots where the crocodiles could regulate their body temperature. Picture them, stretched out in the sun, utterly still save for the slow blink of an eye, looking less like a fearsome beast and more like a very large, very relaxed, sun-worshipping lizard. These areas would have been meticulously maintained, kept clean and free of debris, ensuring a comfortable and hygienic environment for the revered reptiles. It's a bit like designing a luxury catio, but for a creature that weighs a ton and could take off your arm with a flick of its tail. One mainstream historical fact to consider is the famous temple of Ombo, which was unique in being a double temple, dedicated to two deities, Sobek, the crocodile god, and Horus, the falcon-headed god. At Ombo, archaeologists have indeed uncovered evidence of these sacred crocodile pools, complete with ramps and basking areas, demonstrating the meticulous planning that went into their housing. This wasn't just a theory. We have the architectural remains to prove it. You can almost hear the ancient priests saying, "Right, we need a pool here, and make sure it's big enough for a god and his snacks." Now, about the water quality. This is where things get interesting and perhaps a little quirky. Maintaining clean, fresh water in large, open-air pools in a hot climate without modern filtration systems was a significant challenge. Some scholars propose that the ancient Egyptians employed a system of constant replenishment and drainage, allowing fresh Nile water to flow in and old water to drain out, perhaps through a series of sluice gates or channels. This would have kept the water relatively clean, but it's unlikely it was crystal clear by our modern standards. Imagine the priestly interns assigned to pool duty. Probably not the most glamorous job, but certainly essential for keeping the living gods happy and healthy. Historians still argue whether they had advanced sedimentation techniques or if they just relied on the sheer volume of water flow to keep things from getting too stagnant. Perhaps they had a special incantation for purifying water, who knows? It certainly sounds more appealing than scrubbing algae by hand. The sheer scale of these enclosures could be impressive. While some might have been modest, others, particularly in larger cult centers like Crocodilopolis, modern Fayum, were sprawling complexes. Crocodilopolis, as the very name suggests, was a major center for Sobek worship, and the city's main temple would have housed numerous sacred crocodiles. The enclosures there would have been vast, allowing multiple animals to coexist, though likely with enough space to maintain a respectful distance from each other. Because even divine crocodiles appreciate their personal space. You wouldn't want a divine turf war breaking out, after all. The comfort of these animals wasn't solely about physical space and clean water. It also involved providing an environment that mimicked their natural habitat as closely as possible, allowing them to exhibit natural behaviors. This included shaded areas, perhaps provided by strategically planted trees or covered structures, to protect them from the midday sun when they weren't in the water. Remember, even cold-blooded creatures can get too hot. It's like when you're at the beach and need to duck under an umbrella. Same principle, just with more scales and fewer embarrassing tan lines. The security also extended to preventing unauthorized access by people. These weren't petting zoos. The priests who tended to them were highly trained and understood the animals' behavior. For the general populace, the sacred crocodiles were to be revered from a respectful distance. The architectural design of the temple often facilitated this, with viewing points or raised walkways that allowed devotees to glimpse the divine creatures without getting too close. It's a bit like visiting a really exclusive zoo enclosure where the animals are so precious. They're practically behind velvet ropes. In essence, these temple environments were marvels of ancient engineering and animal husbandry, reflecting the immense value and reverence placed upon these living gods. They weren't just keeping animals. They were maintaining living deities in comfort and security, ensuring their well-being as a reflection of the deity's favor. The meticulous planning, the constant upkeep, the sheer dedication involved in creating and maintaining these sacred habitats speaks volumes about the ancient Egyptians' unique and profound relationship with the natural world, and with these particular scaled denizens of the Nile. It's a level of care that would make many modern zoos blush, even if the ancient methods were a little less technologically advanced. But hey, they got the job done, and they did it for thousands of years. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear the gentle splashing of a very contented, very ancient reptile. You step through the cool, shadowed corridors of the temple complex, the soft echoes of your own breathing mingling with the distant, almost imperceptible slosh of water. Here, in the heart of ancient Egypt, you don't find mere animal handlers. You encounter the dedicated priests, the chosen few entrusted with the divine care of Sobek's living avatars. Forget your modern notion of a zookeeper, meticulously charting feeding schedules and hosing down enclosures. What you witness here is a profound, ritualistic devotion, a daily sacrament performed with an almost hypnotic precision. These aren't just keepers. They are ministers to the divine, their every action imbued with sacred meaning. Imagine the dawn breaking, painting the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, as the priests begin their day. You see them, clad in their crisp linen robes, their heads shaven, moving with a solemn grace that speaks of deep reverence. They approach the sacred lake, not with a bucket and a net, but with censers trailing fragrant smoke, their voices murmuring ancient incantations that ripple across the still water. It's a symphony of devotion, a carefully orchestrated ballet of spiritual duty. They are not merely observing their charges. They are communing with them, seeking to understand the subtle shifts in their demeanor, the glint in their ancient eyes, believing these to be whispers from the god himself. You might think crocodile dentist sounds like a bad carnival game, but for these priests, checking the health of those formidable jaws was a very serious, albeit probably terrifying, part of the job description, undertaken with prayers for protection. Their day is a meticulously planned sequence of rituals, each designed to honor and sustain the sacred crocodilians. First, the purification. You watch as priests meticulously clean the sacred pools and lake edges, not with harsh chemicals, but with blessed water, perhaps infused with natron or other purifying agents. Every scoop of silt, every discarded fish bone, is removed with deliberate care, as if cleansing a holy altar. The water quality, you understand, is paramount, not just for the crocodile's physical health, but for their spiritual purity. A healthy, vibrant crocodile is a happy god, and a happy god means a prosperous Nile and fertile lands. It's a bit like ensuring your goldfish has pristine water, but with the added pressure of ensuring the entire kingdom doesn't suffer a drought if you mess up. No pressure at all, right? Then comes the feeding, an elaborate ceremony you've heard whispered about. It's not just about providing sustenance. It's an act of offering, a communion. You observe priests carrying platters laden with choice cuts of meat, often beef or poultry, sometimes even a specially prepared fish dish, and bowls of milk and honey. They approach the water's edge, chanting, their movements slow and deliberate, as the massive, scaly forms glide silently towards them, their eyes fixed with an unnerving intensity. The priests offer the food with outstretched hands, sometimes even placing it gently on the water's surface or directly into the powerful jaws. It's a moment of immense vulnerability and profound trust. And no, they didn't just throw a bucket of fish in and call it a day, like your teenager with their hamster. This was performance art, a sacred drama played out daily. The priests are also responsible for the crocodile's overall well-being. This includes monitoring their behavior, their appetite, and their general condition. You might see a priest carefully observing a basking crocodile, noting the sheen of its scales, the clarity of its eyes, looking for any sign of malaise or distress. Any deviation from the norm could be interpreted as an omen, requiring further rituals or offerings to appease Sobek. They understand the natural rhythms of these creatures, their need for warmth and coolness, for sun and shade. You notice shaded areas carefully constructed, and shallow pools maintained at optimal temperatures. It's a holistic approach to care, blending practical husbandry with deep spiritual insight. One fascinating aspect, a quirky tidbit you pick up from whispers among the temple staff, is that some priests were said to develop such a close bond with individual crocodiles that they could call them by specific names. Imagine, "Come here, beloved Potty Sobek, your breakfast awaits." It suggests a level of personal connection beyond mere reverence for a species, hinting at an appreciation for the individual manifestation of the divine. This personal touch, however, doesn't negate the inherent danger. Historians still debate the extent to which these sacred crocodiles were truly tame, or if the priests' interactions were a carefully managed high-stakes dance, relying more on ritualistic awe than genuine domestication. You certainly wouldn't want to trip and fall into the pool on their watch. Beyond feeding and physical care, the priests also acted as interpreters of the divine will, as manifested through the crocodiles. A sudden splash, an unusual vocalization, or even the way a crocodile chose to bask could be seen as a message from Sobek. The priests would meticulously record these observations, consulting ancient texts and their own accumulated wisdom to decipher the god's intentions. They were the intermediaries, the conduits between the human realm and the reptilian divine. Imagine updating your resume. Duties included divine reptile whisperer, sacred poop scooper, and occasional omen interpreter. Talk about a diverse skill set. The dedication extends to every detail. You learn that specialized oils and unguents, perhaps even scented with myrrh or frankincense, were sometimes applied to the crocodile scales during certain rituals, believed to enhance their vitality and sacred presence. This wasn't just about making them shiny. It was about anointing them, consecrating their very being. The mainstream historical fact here is that Egyptian priests had highly specialized roles within temples, from ritualists to administrators to those caring for sacred animals like these. This was a well-organized, hierarchical system, and the care of the sacred crocodiles was considered one of the most prestigious and vital duties. The priest's devotion was absolute, born of a deep-seated belief that by caring for these magnificent creatures, they were directly serving the god Sobek, ensuring the prosperity and protection of Egypt itself. Their lives revolved around the sacred crocodiles, a continuous cycle of prayer, purification, feeding, and observation. It was a 24/7 commitment, a sacred trust passed down through generations. They lived and breathed the presence of the divine, manifested in the ancient, scaly forms that glided through the temple waters. Their care was not just physical. It was spiritual, a constant affirmation of the profound bond between humanity and the powerful forces of the Nile, embodied in its most formidable resident. You've seen the priests meticulously feed them, watched them tend to their sacred charges. But now, you lean in a little closer, and the air around you seems to shimmer with anticipation. This isn't just about sustenance and comfort, oh no. This is about status. This is about showing the world, and indeed the gods, just how utterly special these scaly, toothy residents truly are. You're about to witness something that, frankly, puts your dog's rhinestone collar to shame: the adorning of the divine. Imagine, if you will, the soft, diffused light filtering into the temple enclosure. The air, usually thick with the scent of offerings and the dampness of the sacred lake, now carries a faint metallic tang, a whisper of something precious. You see a priest approach a particularly large, serene crocodile. Its eyes, often so cold and ancient, seem to hold a glint of something almost regal. And why wouldn't they? Because this isn't just a crocodile. This is a living, breathing, occasionally napping embodiment of Sobek, and it's about to get its bling on. The ancient Egyptians, bless their sartorially splendid hearts, understood the power of a good accessory. If it was good enough for pharaohs and high priests, why not for a god on earth? You watch as the priests, with an almost tender reverence that belies the creature's predatory nature, begin their delicate task. They're not just tossing a string of beads over its head. Mind you, this is a ritual, a meticulous act of devotion. You see them bring forth trays laden with treasures. There are necklaces, not just simple strings, but elaborate collars, broad and intricate, crafted from gold, lapis lazuli, carnelian, and brightly colored faience beads. The gold catches the light, a warm, rich glow against the crocodile's dark, leathery skin. Lapis lazuli, with its deep, celestial blue, evokes the heavens and the primordial waters from which Sobek was said to emerge. Carnelian, a vibrant red-orange, might symbolize the life-giving sun or the protective power of blood. These aren't just pretty baubles. Each material, each color, holds profound symbolic meaning in the Egyptian cosmos. It's like their version of a diamond-encrusted watch, but, for a reptile that could eat you. You can almost hear the soft clinking of the beads as they are carefully draped around the crocodile's powerful neck. It's a surprisingly gentle sound, given the sheer mass of the creature. You might expect a sudden snap, a flick of a tail, but no. The crocodiles, perhaps used to the ritual or perhaps just supremely chill after a good meal, seem to tolerate, even accept, this attention. It's a testament to the priest's patience and the crocodile's apparent understanding of their revered status. Or maybe they just know that if they stay still, more delicious fish might appear. Hard to say. Beyond the necklaces, you notice smaller, individual charms. These aren't just for show. They're imbued with protective magic, symbols of power and well-being. You might see a tiny amulet of the Eye of Horus, warding off evil, or an ankh, the symbol of life. Scarabs, representing rebirth and the rising sun, would be common. Perhaps even small representations of Sobek himself, solidifying the crocodile's connection to its divine patron. Think of them as ancient Egyptian versions of those little good luck charms you hang from your rearview mirror, but with a much higher budget and a lot more spiritual weight. One mainstream historical fact that really hits you here is the sheer mastery of ancient Egyptian jewelers. They weren't just skilled, they were phenomenal. Their techniques for working with gold, setting precious stones, and creating intricate beadwork were incredibly advanced for their time. The craftsmanship evident in surviving pieces, even those not directly from crocodiles, reveals a society that valued beauty and symbolism equally. Imagine trying to thread tiny faience beads onto a gold wire while a 15-foot reptile is breathing down your neck. Talk about pressure. Now, you might wonder, how did they keep these magnificent necklaces on? Crocodiles aren't exactly known for their cooperative nature when it comes to fashion. This is where the priestly devotion comes in. Historians still argue whether these adornments were worn continuously or only for specific ceremonies and public displays. Some argue that continuous wear would be impractical and potentially harmful, while others suggest that the crocodiles were so docile and accustomed to their caretakers that it wasn't an issue. Perhaps they were designed to be easily fastened and removed, or maybe certain crocodiles were just incredibly chill about their haute couture. You can almost picture a priest saying, "Just 5 more minutes, Mr. Snappy. We're almost done with your collar." A quirky or fringe tidbit that might make you chuckle is the idea that some of these charms might have been offerings from the public. Imagine a devout Egyptian bringing a small, personal amulet to the temple, hoping it would be placed upon the sacred crocodile, thereby transferring its protective power to their own life. It's a bit like wishing on a star, but the star is a very large reptile wearing a lot of gold. It speaks volumes about the direct, personal connection people felt to these living gods. You can almost hear the conversation. "Yes, I know it's just a tiny bronze frog, but I really think it would bring Sobek good luck." The sensory details here are crucial. You don't just see the jewels. You imagine the cool, smooth feel of the polished stones against the crocodile's scales, the subtle jingle of the gold as it shifts its immense weight. You might even catch the faint, earthy scent of the crocodile itself, mingled with the clean smell of the gold and the subtle aroma of the temple. It's a multisensory experience that reinforces the unique blend of the wild and the divine. The purpose of these adornments went beyond mere aesthetics. They were potent symbols of the crocodile's divine status, its connection to Sobek, and its role as a living deity. They were a visual manifestation of the immense respect and veneration bestowed upon these creatures. When you saw a crocodile adorned with such splendor, there was no mistaking its sacred nature. It wasn't just a big lizard. It was a god. It was a statement piece, a religious declaration, and probably the most expensive pet accessory program in ancient history. Forget designer handbags, these guys had designer necks. So you stand there, watching the final touches being applied, a sense of wonder washing over you. The Nile's formidable apex predator, once a creature of fear, now transformed into a glittering, living idol, draped in the very essence of Egyptian craftsmanship and devotion. It's a powerful image, a testament to a culture that found divinity in the most unexpected of places, and then proceeded to deck it out in its finest. You can't help but think that somewhere, a pharaoh is looking down, nodding approvingly at the sheer opulence. You stand in the hushed, cool confines of the temple complex, the usual gentle murmur of daily life now replaced by a profound, heavy silence. A sacred crocodile, one of Sobek's living embodiments, has passed. It's a moment of immense gravity, a ripple of solemn understanding passing through the very stones of the ancient structure. You feel the collective intake of breath from the priests and temple attendants, a quiet sigh of reverence for a life that was both animal and divine. There's no panic, no frantic rush, only a deep, measured sorrow that settles like the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight. The news travels with a quiet urgency, not shouted but whispered from one robed figure to another. You observe the immediate shift in the priest's demeanor. Their usual attentive care for the living deity now transforms into a meticulous, ritualistic preparation for its ultimate journey. This isn't just about a creature that breathed its last. It's about a sacred vessel returning to its divine source. The air, usually thick with the scent of offerings and the earthy smell of the sacred lake, now carries a faint, sweet tang of myrrh and frankincense, already being prepared for the rites to come. It's a scent that tells you, without a single word, that something truly profound is about to unfold. Specialized priests, those most intimately connected with the sacred crocodilians, approach the deceased animal with a tenderness that borders on awe. They move with deliberate, almost dreamlike slowness, their hands performing gestures honed over centuries. You watch as they gently begin the initial purification rites. Imagine trying to wash a creature that could, in life, snap a limb off with a single bite. Yet here, in death, it is handled with the delicate precision one might reserve for a sleeping infant. They use cool, pure Nile water, carefully poured from ornate vessels, cleansing the body with ritualistic care. This isn't just hygiene. It's a spiritual purification, preparing the sacred form for its passage. Following the cleansing, the anointing begins. You smell the rich, complex aromas of precious oils and unguents, carefully blended and stored in alabaster jars. These aren't just perfumes. They are sacred concoctions, believed to imbue the deceased with divine essence and protect it on its journey through the Egyptian underworld. As the priests apply these fragrant balms, you can almost hear the soft, rhythmic chanting that accompanies their every move, a low, hypnotic hum that reverberates through the temple. It's a stark contrast to the lively splashing you might have heard when the crocodile was alive and frolicking in its sacred lake. Isn't it? No big splash now, just solemn, fragrant whispers. Once purified and anointed, the sacred crocodile is carefully lifted onto a specially prepared bier. This is no easy feat, even for a young or moderately sized animal, let alone a venerable, full-grown one that might weigh as much as a small car. You can almost hear the strained grunts of the bearers, though they are hidden beneath the solemnity of the occasion. It's a moment where you might find yourself thinking, "Phew, good thing they didn't have to carry this guy up a flight of stairs." The bier itself is often adorned with gilded elements and intricate carvings, transforming it from a mere stretcher into a ceremonial vessel for the journey. The procession begins, a slow, stately movement through the temple grounds. You walk alongside the priests, feeling the rhythmic thud of their sandaled feet on the cool stone. The air is thick with the scent of burning incense, billowing in clouds around the bier, creating a mystical, ethereal atmosphere. This isn't just a funeral march. It's a public display of reverence, a final farewell to a living god. You might see temple servants, even some privileged commoners, lining the processional path, bowing their heads in respect, their faces a mixture of sorrow and awe. This particular ceremony, this solemn procession of a sacred animal, was a mainstream historical fact of ancient Egyptian religious life, an integral part of their devotion to deities like Sobek. It underscored the profound belief that these creatures were more than just animals. They were manifestations of the divine. As the procession reaches a designated area within the temple complex, perhaps a special chamber or a courtyard prepared for the rites, the full weight of the funerary ceremonies begins to unfold. Priests, now gathered around the bier, commence their incantations. Their voices, once a low hum, rise and fall in a complex melody of ancient words, prayers directed not just to Sobek, but to Osiris, the lord of the underworld, petitioning for a safe passage for the departed. You hear the clink of offering vessels, the soft rustle of linen, as symbolic gifts are laid out around the body, perhaps small clay models of food, or even tiny, miniature replicas of the temple itself, ensuring the crocodile lacked nothing in its afterlife. This is where the transition truly begins, not just physically, but spiritually. The rituals are designed to ensure the crocodile's Ka, life force, and Ba, personality/soul, could reunite and continue to exist in the afterlife, much like a human pharaoh. It's a fascinating extension of their human funerary beliefs to the animal kingdom, particularly for these sacred creatures. You might even observe priests performing symbolic gestures, perhaps tracing patterns in the air above the crocodile, or sprinkling sacred sand. The whole performance is aimed at guiding the deceased spirit, ensuring it merges seamlessly back with the cosmic order, or specifically with Sobek himself. It's a bit like sending off a very important package, isn't it? You want to make sure it gets to the right address intact and with all its precious contents. One particularly quirky or fringe tidbit from historical accounts suggests that some offerings placed with the sacred crocodiles included small mummified animals like mice or birds, intended as sustenance for the crocodile in the afterlife. Imagine, even in death, they thought about providing snacks. It speaks volumes about the meticulous care and the very literal interpretation of their beliefs in an eternal existence for these divine creatures. These weren't just symbolic gestures. They were practical provisions for a spiritual journey. As the ceremonies reach their peak, the sacred crocodile is adorned for its final journey. The precious jewelry and charms you learned about previously, the very adornments it wore in life, are now carefully placed upon its body, or perhaps beside it, ensuring its divine status is recognized in the afterlife. Golden collars, carnelian pendants, and intricate beadwork shimmer in the dim light, a testament to the immense value and reverence bestowed upon these creatures. This final adornment is not for display to the living, but a declaration to the gods of the underworld of the deceased's exalted status. Finally, the moment comes for the sacred crocodile to be placed in its burial chamber or designated resting place. This might be a specially prepared crypt within the temple complex itself, or a journey to a nearby necropolis dedicated to these revered reptiles. The chamber, often carefully carved and sometimes even decorated, is cool and silent, a testament to the permanence of the resting place. The priests perform the last prayers, sealing the tomb, ensuring its sanctity and protecting the sacred remains within. You feel a sense of completion, a profound quietness descending as the last rituals conclude. Historians still argue whether the depth of grief shown by the priests for these sacred crocodiles was purely ritualistic and a performance of devotion, or if it genuinely encompassed a personal emotional connection to the individual animal they had cared for so intimately. While their sacred role was paramount, it's hard to imagine that years of dedicated daily care wouldn't foster some form of affection, even if it was intertwined with profound reverence. You can almost feel the lingering echoes of their chants and prayers, a final blessing echoing into eternity for these magnificent creatures of the Nile, now returned to the embrace of Sobek. When you consider the sheer devotion the ancient Egyptians poured into their sacred crocodiles, it's not entirely surprising that their care extended beyond life itself. Once a revered Sobek incarnate breathed its last, the journey wasn't over. Oh no, that was just the beginning of its ultimate transformation, a meticulous process designed to ensure its divine form would endure for eternity. You might imagine a frantic dash, a sudden, sorrowful end, but in truth, it was a transition, a passage into the embrace of the afterlife, preserved with an astonishing level of dedication. Picture, if you will, the hushed reverence that descends upon the temple grounds. The air, usually alive with the low gurgle of the sacred lake and the rustle of papyrus, now holds a solemn weight. When one of these magnificent creatures passed, it wasn't simply buried. That would be, frankly, a bit undignified for a living god, wouldn't it? Instead, the most skilled embalmers and priests, often the very same individuals who had fed and cared for the crocodile in life, would prepare for the ultimate act of preservation, mummification. It was a testament to their belief that the physical body was a crucial vessel for the Ka, life force, and Ba, personality, to return to in the afterlife. You see, they didn't just want a memory. They wanted a tangible, eternal presence. The process, while sharing similarities with human mummification, had its own unique challenges and adaptations when applied to a creature as formidable and, let's be honest, as leathery as a crocodile. Think about it. A human body is one thing, but a reptile with scales and a powerful, dense musculature? That requires a different kind of finesse. The first step, much like with humans, involved purification. The body of the deceased crocodile would be thoroughly cleaned, often with sacred oils and water, preparing it for the intricate work ahead. You can almost smell the faint, earthy scent of the Nile mingling with the clean aroma of ritualistic washing in the dry, crisp air of the embalming workshop. Then came the crucial stage of evisceration. To prevent decomposition, the internal organs, which are the first to decay, had to be removed. Now, historians still debate the exact methods used for eviscerating such large and tough-skinned creatures, especially whether specific incisions were always made or if other, less invasive techniques were sometimes employed. It's not like they had a handy instruction manual titled, Mummifying Your Megareptile, a step-by-step guide. But however it was done, the goal was the same, to remove the perishable organs while keeping the external form as intact as possible. The brain, for instance, might be removed through the nostrils, a common practice for humans, though for a crocodile it likely required a bit more creative angling. The larger organs from the body cavity, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines would be carefully extracted. These, like human organs, might then be dried and preserved separately, sometimes placed in miniature canopic jars or simply reinserted into the body cavity after treatment. After the removal of the organs, the body cavity would be thoroughly cleaned and often rinsed with palm wine and spices, acting as a natural disinfectant. This is where the real magic of desiccation began. The body would be packed and covered with natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture found in dried lake beds in Egypt. This remarkable substance, a blend of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate, was a cornerstone of Egyptian mummification for both humans and animals, and it was incredibly effective. You can imagine the scene. A large, imposing crocodile, laid out on a table, slowly disappearing under a mountain of coarse, white natron crystals. It's like a spa treatment if your idea of a spa involves being completely buried in salt for 40 to 70 days. No, not quite the same as making jerky for your road trip, but the principle of dehydration is similar. This process would slowly draw all the moisture out of the tissues, preventing bacterial growth and preserving the body. You'd probably need a really big scoop for this part, wouldn't you? Once the crocodile's body was thoroughly dehydrated and stiff, it would be removed from the natron. The salt would be brushed away, revealing a shrunken, darkened, yet remarkably preserved form. The next step was to restore the body's natural shape, which often became quite emaciated after the desiccation process. The empty body cavity would be carefully stuffed with various materials, linen scraps, sawdust, sand, or even dry plant material, to give the crocodile a more lifelike appearance. Sometimes, resin-soaked linen was used, which would harden and provide structural integrity. It's a bit like giving a very, very old plush toy a fresh stuffing, ensuring it looks its best for its eternal slumber. Then came the wrapping, a painstaking process that could take days, or even weeks, for a large crocodile. Priests and embalmers would meticulously wrap the entire body in countless layers of linen bandages, often soaked in resin. Each limb, each toe, and even the individual scales might be separately wrapped before the entire body was encased. This wasn't just about aesthetics. The tightly bound layers provided protection against physical damage and further decay. As the priests worked, they would often recite prayers and incantations, ensuring the spiritual well-being of the crocodile for its journey to the afterlife. You can almost hear the rhythmic rustle of linen against the quiet chanting, the air thick with the faint, sweet scent of resin and ancient reverence. And it wasn't just plain linen. Oh no, these were divine beings, after all. Amulets and charms, often made of faience, stone, or even precious metals, would be placed between the layers of bandages. These protective talismans, imbued with magical power, were intended to safeguard the crocodile's journey through the underworld and ensure its rebirth. You might find a scarab beetle for regeneration, an eye of Horus for protection, or a jed pillar for stability. It's like adding little surprise gifts inside a very, very elaborate birthday present. Except the recipient is a mummified reptile on its way to meet Osiris. What's truly fascinating, and perhaps a little quirky, is that some crocodile mummies have been found to contain not just the one large crocodile, but also smaller, miniature mummified crocodiles or even eggs within their wraps. This wasn't just a space-saving measure. It likely symbolized fertility, the cycle of life and rebirth, or perhaps even represented a family unit accompanying the main deity. It's a touching detail, underscoring the profound symbolic meaning woven into every aspect of their rituals. Finally, the wrapped crocodile, now a perfectly preserved, eternal form, would sometimes be placed in a specially crafted coffin, often made of wood and shaped to its reptilian form, sometimes even decorated with painted eyes or scales. These coffins were more like elaborate sarcophagi, designed to further protect the sacred mummy. The scale of this practice is truly astounding. Archaeologists have uncovered sites where thousands upon thousands of mummified crocodiles have been found, ranging from tiny hatchlings to colossal adults. Each one represents an incredible investment of time, resources, and unwavering faith, a testament to how deeply ingrained the worship of Sobek and his living avatars was in the fabric of ancient Egyptian society. It's an enduring legacy of a civilization that truly believed in the power of preservation, not just for kings and queens, but for their scaly, divine companions too. You trudge through the soft, yielding sand, the air around you dry and still, carrying the faint, ancient scent of dust and time. The sun has dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep violet and fading orange. But the warmth of the day still lingers, radiating from the very ground beneath your feet. You're not just walking on sand. You're walking on centuries of history, a silent testament to a devotion so profound it feels almost alien to our modern sensibilities. You've heard the whispers, seen the faint outlines on maps, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the sheer, overwhelming scale of what you're about to discover. You're journeying into the heart of a necropolis, not for humans, but for the very creatures we've been discussing. The beloved, sacred crocodiles of ancient Egypt. Imagine, if you will, the early archaeologists. They weren't just digging for pharaohs and glittering gold. Oh no, sometimes they stumbled upon something far more reptilian. You picture them, sweat dripping, brushing away layers of millennia, expecting perhaps a pot, a statue, maybe a lost sandal. And then, suddenly, a shape emerges from the earth. Not human, not animal in the way they expected, but unmistakably, undeniably, the elongated, scaly form of a crocodile. And then another, and another. It's like finding a single antique button, then realizing you've unearthed an entire department store full of them. A department store that specialized exclusively in very, very old, very dead reptiles. The most famous of these sites, the veritable capital of crocodile necropolises, is located near the modern town of Ombo, nestled on the Nile's east bank. Here, beside the magnificent twin temple dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile god, and Horus, the falcon god, lies a discovery that truly boggles the mind. You imagine the initial excavations, the methodical scraping, the careful documenting, the growing realization that this wasn't just a few isolated burials. This was thousands. And when we say thousands, we're not talking about a casual collection of a few dozen. We're talking about a scale that makes your local pet cemetery look like a single, lonely goldfish bowl. You stand there, metaphorically speaking, gazing into the excavated pits, the neatly arranged rows of mummified forms. Some are colossal, easily stretching several meters, the full-grown adults who once commanded respect and fear in the temple lakes. Their jaws, once capable of snapping bone, are now tightly bound, their scales preserved by the meticulous mummification process. But you also see the smaller ones, hundreds upon hundreds of them, tiny bundles no bigger than your forearm, some still curled in the fetal position. These are the hatchlings, the young ones, perhaps considered pure and innocent, or perhaps simply more numerous, destined for a sacred burial from the very beginning of their short lives. It's a bit like a reptile daycare, if the daycare's ultimate purpose was eternal slumber in a very well-preserved state. The sheer volume of mummified crocodiles at Ombo is a mainstream historical fact that continues to astonish. Archaeologists have uncovered a vast network of underground galleries and chambers, packed wall-to-wall with these reptilian remains. While estimates vary depending on what constitutes a complete mummy versus fragments, the numbers easily run into the hundreds of thousands, suggesting a continuous, long-standing practice spanning centuries. It's not just a few beloved pets. It's an industry of reverence, a testament to the profound religious significance of these creatures. You can almost hear the ancient priests sighing, "Another one? Right? Get the natron." As you delve deeper into the discovered necropolises, you start to notice the details. Some of the mummies are incredibly well preserved, wrapped in fine linen, adorned with beads or small amulets, much like a human burial. These are likely the truly revered temple residents, the ones who enjoyed a life of luxury and priestly care. But then you encounter others that are more rustic. Some are simply dried out, perhaps bundled crudely, suggesting they might have been votive offerings from pilgrims rather than the high-status temple dwellers. This brings us to a fascinating point of scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether all these mummified crocodiles were once cherished pets of the temple, or if a significant portion were mass-produced offerings, purchased by devout Egyptians to leave at the temple as a form of worship, much like lighting a candle in a church today. Was every mummified crocodile a beloved individual, or were some more akin to a sacred souvenir? It's a question that makes you ponder the difference between genuine affection and religious transaction. Among the thousands, you might stumble upon a quirky or fringe tidbit: the discovery of crocodile eggs, also mummified and carefully placed alongside the mummies of their potential offspring. It's a touching detail, showing a complete understanding of the crocodile life cycle and a desire to extend the sacredness even to the unborn. Or perhaps you'd see a mummy that clearly suffered from a specific ailment, its bones showing signs of a healed injury, suggesting that these creatures, even in their sacred roles, were still subject to the natural world's trials and tribulations. You can almost hear an ancient priest grunt. The procession begins, a slow, stately movement through the temple grounds. You walk alongside the priests, feeling the rhythmic thud of their sandaled feet on the cool stone. The air is thick with the scent of burning incense, billowing in clouds around the bier, creating a mystical, ethereal atmosphere. This isn't just a funeral march. It's a public display of reverence, a final farewell to a living god. You might see temple servants, even some privileged commoners, lining the processional path, bowing their heads in respect, their faces a mixture of sorrow and awe. This particular ceremony, this solemn procession of a sacred animal, was a mainstream historical fact of ancient Egyptian religious life, an integral part of their devotion to deities like Sobek. It underscored the profound belief that these creatures were more than just animals. They were manifestations of the divine. As the procession reaches a designated area within the temple complex, perhaps a special chamber or a courtyard prepared for the rites, the full weight of the funerary ceremonies begins to unfold. Priests, now gathered around the bier, commence their incantations. Their voices, once a low hum, rise and fall in a complex melody of ancient words, prayers directed not just to Sobek, but to Osiris, the lord of the underworld, petitioning for a safe passage for the departed. You hear the clink of offering vessels, the soft rustle of linen, as symbolic gifts are laid out. You're standing on the sun-baked streets of ancient Crocodilopolis, or perhaps Shedet as it was known, near the mighty Fayum oasis. The air is thick with anticipation, a vibrant hum rising from the gathered crowds. You've woken up early, perhaps a little grumpy from the heat, but the promise of seeing Sobek's living embodiment has pulled you from your reed mat. Today, my friend, is a day of spectacle, a grand public display where the revered crocodiles, those scaly embodiments of the divine, are brought forth to awe the populace. Imagine the scene, if you will, like a supersized, ancient Egyptian version of a celebrity red carpet event, but instead of Hollywood's glitterati, you're waiting for a magnificent living dinosaur. The streets, usually bustling with merchants hawking their wares and farmers bringing their produce to market, are now cleared, swept clean by temple servants. Guards in crisp linen kilts stand at intervals, their expressions stern, though even they can't entirely hide the excitement in their eyes. You jostle gently with your neighbors, a mix of farmers, artisans, and scribes, all craning their necks, eager for the first glimpse. The scent of incense, heavy and sweet, begins to drift through the air, mingling with the earthy smell of the Nile and the faint, ever-present aroma of dust. You can almost feel the vibrations of distant drums, a low, rhythmic pulse that seems to beat in time with your own heart. Then a ripple goes through the crowd. A hush falls, not a complete silence, but a respectful muttering, like 1,000 hushed whispers. The drums grow louder, joined by the reedy wail of oboes and the clatter of sistra, those ancient rattles that sound a bit like a gentle rain stick if it were made of metal. And then they appear. First, a phalanx of priests, their heads shaven, dressed in pristine white linen robes, their faces painted with kohl around their eyes. They carry banners depicting Sobek, the crocodile-headed god, his fierce visage benevolent yet powerful. Some carry tall standards topped with golden crocodile effigies, catching the sunlight and glinting like scattered jewels. Behind them, the true marvel of the procession begins to unfold. You lean forward, trying to get a better view. And there it is. Not just one, but several of the sacred crocodiles, paraded through the very heart of the city. Now, you might be picturing someone walking a crocodile on a leash like a very unusual dog walk. But no, that's not quite how it worked. These are massive creatures, often many feet long, and while they might seem docile in their temple pools, you wouldn't want to be the one trying to convince a 15-foot reptile to politely trot along. Instead, they're transported with immense care and ingenuity. For smaller, younger sacred crocodiles, or those deemed more manageable, they might be carried on specially constructed litters or stretchers. Imagine a robust wooden frame, perhaps lined with soft reeds and damp cloths to keep the animal comfortable and hydrated, carried on the shoulders of a dozen or more strong temple servants. You can see the sheer muscle required for this task, their shoulders straining under the weight. The crocodile itself, often adorned with the very jewels and charms we talked about earlier, gold rings on its legs, perhaps a jeweled collar around its neck, lies relatively still, its ancient eyes blinking slowly, perhaps a little bewildered by all the fuss. You can't help but wonder if it's thinking, "Are we there yet? My scales are getting a bit dry." For the truly colossal specimens, the grand patriarchs of the temple lakes, the logistics become even more fascinating. Historians still argue whether some of the largest, truly gigantic crocodiles were transported entirely on land for these parades, or if they were primarily displayed in their temple lakes or in specially constructed, temporary water basins along the procession route. Some theories suggest custom-built, water-filled palanquins, like enormous mobile aquariums, pulled on sledges by teams of oxen or even hundreds of human laborers. Imagine the engineering feat involved in keeping a several-ton reptile, submerged in water, moving smoothly through a crowded city. It makes modern parade floats look like child's play, frankly. As the first crocodile passes, a collective gasp goes through the crowd. Its scales shimmer, a mosaic of greens and browns, wet and gleaming in the sun. Its powerful tail, usually used for propulsion in the water, is carefully secured, perhaps even gently wrapped to prevent any unexpected flailing. You might even catch a glimpse of its massive jaws, though thankfully, they're likely secured or simply kept closed. The priests walking alongside it murmur chants, sprinkling water from sacred vessels as they move, purifying the path and blessing the onlookers. This wasn't just a show. It was a profound religious experience. These processions were a mainstream historical fact of ancient Egyptian religious life, a powerful way for the common people to connect with the divine, to witness the tangible presence of their gods. Seeing the sacred crocodile was believed to bring blessings, to ensure the continued fertility of the Nile, and to protect the land from harm. It reinforced the power of the priests and the pharaoh, who were seen as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. It was a reaffirmation of the cosmic order, a living prayer moving through the streets. You notice a small child, clutching their mother's hand, pointing with wide, awestruck eyes at the passing reptile. The mother gently squeezes the child's hand, a look of reverence on her face. It's a moment of shared wonder, transcending age and status. You might even see people bowing their heads or throwing small offerings, perhaps a fresh fig, a handful of grain, or a tiny, carefully crafted miniature crocodile amulet onto the path before the creature, hoping it might receive their humble tribute. You might even hear someone whisper a prayer for a good harvest or for protection from floods, believing the crocodile, as an embodiment of Sobek, could grant their wishes. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. There are some fascinating theories that suggest that during these parades, or perhaps specific rituals associated with them, the priests might have used various methods to ensure the crocodile remained relatively calm. Some believe they might have gently massaged specific pressure points, or even used certain soothing incantations. Imagine trying to give a therapeutic massage to a creature with jaws capable of snapping a limb clean off. That takes some serious dedication, or perhaps just a very strong belief in divine protection. I mean, if I were a priest, I'd probably be offering it an extra-large fish, just in case it got hangry. The procession moves slowly, deliberately. The rhythmic chanting of the priests, the mournful sound of the flutes, and the steady thrum of the drums create an almost hypnotic atmosphere. The air shimmers with heat and incense, and you feel a strange mix of awe and a primal, instinctive fear. After all, despite its sacred status, this is still a powerful predator. It's a reminder of the wild, untamed forces of nature that the Egyptians sought to understand and, through their gods, to control. As the last of the sacred crocodiles passes by, The crowd slowly begins to disperse, the spell broken, but the memory lingers. People chat excitedly, recounting what they saw, discussing the size of the creatures, the beauty of their adornments. You feel a sense of connection, not just to your fellow citizens, but to something ancient and profound. You've witnessed a living god, paraded through your very streets. It's a spectacle unlike any other, a testament to the unique and deeply spiritual bond the ancient Egyptians forged with these magnificent, formidable creatures of the Nile. And as the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, you can almost still hear the distant thrum of the drums, a lullaby from a time when gods walked among men, even if those gods had scales and very large teeth. As the echoes of ancient processions fade, and you imagine the solemn priests leading their scaly charges, adorned with glittering jewels, through awestruck crowds, you might find yourself wondering, what's the point? What does all this tell us about the ancient Egyptians? Well, dear listener, it tells us everything. It speaks to the very soul of a civilization that saw the divine in the most unexpected places, a civilization that forged an utterly unique, deeply complex relationship with one of nature's most formidable predators. This isn't just a story about ancient pet ownership, though it has its charmingly absurd moments. It's a profound look into the enduring legacy of the Nile's sacred giants and the indelible insights they offer into an ancient way of life. You see, the ancient Egyptians lived by the Nile, their very existence dictated by its rhythms, its bounty, and its dangers. The crocodile, the apex predator of that life-giving river, was not merely an animal. It was a living, breathing embodiment of the forces that shaped their world. It was a creature of creation, capable of bringing life to the muddy banks through its offspring, yet also a creature of destruction, a swift and silent killer. This duality, this inherent paradox, was fascinating to the Egyptian mind. They didn't shy away from it. They embraced it, personifying it in Sobek, the crocodile god, who could be both benevolent protector and terrifying avenger. Think about it. In a world where survival hinged on understanding and respecting nature, the crocodile represented power, fertility, and the unpredictable chaos of the floods. By elevating it to divinity, by caring for it with such meticulous devotion, the Egyptians weren't just worshipping an animal. They were acknowledging and attempting to harness the raw, untamed power of their environment. It's like us trying to befriend a particularly grumpy, scaly T-Rex, only with more incense and less screaming. This pragmatic acceptance of their natural world, even its most terrifying aspects, is a cornerstone of their cultural outlook. They didn't try to conquer nature. They tried to integrate with it, to find its divine spark, even if that spark came with very sharp teeth. This relationship also reveals the incredible complexity of ancient Egyptian religious thought. It wasn't a simple good god, bad god scenario. Sobek, the very deity embodied by these sacred crocodilians, was a god of fertility and creation, associated with the life-giving waters of the Nile. Yet, he also possessed a fearsome, aggressive aspect, embodying the dangers of the river. This nuanced understanding of divinity, where a single entity could encompass seemingly contradictory traits, shows a level of spiritual sophistication that often surprises modern minds. It's a bit like trying to explain why your cat can be both a cuddly purr machine and a tiny, furry assassin in the span of 5 minutes. It's all part of the package, darling. The immense societal investment in these sacred crocodilians speaks volumes about ancient Egyptian values. We're not talking about a small, isolated cult. We're talking about dedicated temple complexes, a priestly class whose entire lives revolved around the care of these animals, and the expenditure of significant resources on their feeding, housing, and even their elaborate mummification. Imagine the budget meetings for that department. Yes, Pharaoh, we need another ton of prime cuts for the sacred Sobek pets this quarter, and perhaps a new gold necklace for the one with the particularly charming eye twitch. This wasn't a fringe hobby. It was deeply integrated into the fabric of their society, a testament to the profound spiritual significance they ascribed to these living gods. It demonstrates how deeply intertwined their religious beliefs were with their daily lives and economic structures. While we might hesitate to call them pets in the modern sense, You probably wouldn't let a sacred crocodile sleep at the foot of your bed. Unless you're really brave, the level of care given to these animals goes far beyond mere ritualistic duty. The detailed enclosures, the specific diets, the adornments, and especially the mummification processes, suggest a genuine respect, perhaps even a form of affection, for these living embodiments of the divine. They were not just symbols, they were revered individuals. Historians still argue whether this was genuine affection, a pragmatic appeasement of a dangerous force, or purely ritualistic reverence for the divine spirit within. It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? Were the priests truly fond of their scaly charges, or were they just doing their job, albeit a very important one? One mainstream historical fact that underscores the scale of this practice is the sheer number of mummified crocodiles discovered in necropolises like Ombo and Tuna el Gebel. Thousands upon thousands of carefully preserved crocodilians, ranging from hatchlings to enormous adults, have been unearthed. This isn't just a few isolated cases. It's evidence of a widespread, consistent practice that spans centuries. It tells us that the worship of Sobek and the reverence for his living embodiments were deeply ingrained across various regions of Egypt, particularly in areas like the Fayum Oasis and Ombo, which were major centers of Sobek's cult. It's a bit like finding out that everyone in ancient Egypt was secretly obsessed with collecting a very specific, very large, and very toothy type of souvenir. Now for a quirky tidbit. While the sacred crocodiles housed in temples were certainly not pets in the sense of a family dog, there is some archaeological and textual evidence that wealthy Egyptians, perhaps inspired by the reverence for the sacred crocodilians, might have occasionally kept smaller, non-sacred crocodiles in private ponds or as exotic curiosities. Imagine showing up to a dinner party and your host casually introduces you to their little snappy boy in the garden. Oh, don't worry, he's mostly house-trained. Mostly. This blurs the line between sacred devotion and personal fascination, suggesting that the crocodile, in all its forms, held a peculiar allure for the ancient Egyptian elite. It speaks to a society that was not just religiously devoted to these creatures, but also, perhaps, just a little bit intrigued by their sheer reptilian charm. The legacy of the Nile's sacred giants isn't just about ancient religious practices. It's about understanding a civilization's worldview. It reveals a culture deeply attuned to the natural world, finding divinity and meaning in its most powerful manifestations. It highlights their complex spiritual beliefs, their societal organization, and their unique blend of pragmatism and profound reverence. It reminds us that ancient Egypt wasn't just pyramids and pharaohs. It was a vibrant, living culture that built entire theological systems around creatures that most of us would run screaming from. They found beauty and power in the very things that terrified them, transforming fear into faith. It's a powerful lesson in perspective, isn't it? So, as you drift off, consider the enduring mystery of these magnificent reptiles. They were feared predators, yet revered deities. They embodied chaos, yet promised fertility. They were wild animals, yet meticulously cared for and adorned. This paradox, this embrace of contradiction, is at the heart of the ancient Egyptian spirit. Their relationship with the crocodile is a window into a world where the lines between the sacred and the mundane, the wild and the domesticated, were beautifully, fascinatingly blurred. The ancient Egyptians left us a legacy not just of stone monuments, but of a profound spiritual connection to their world, a connection that saw the divine in the glint of a crocodile's eye, in the power of its tail, and in the silent majesty of its ancient form. And perhaps, just perhaps, as you close your eyes, you can almost hear the gentle lapping of water in a temple lake, and the soft, deep rumble of a scaly god, dreaming its ancient dreams. The sun has set on our journey through ancient Egypt's unique history with its sacred reptilian companions. The stories of their veneration, their daily rituals, their jeweled adornments, and their solemn burials now settle gently in your mind, like the soft sands of the desert at dusk. You have traveled through time, witnessed the profound devotion of priests, and glimpsed a world where the formidable crocodile was not just an animal, but a living embodiment of the divine, a creature both feared and deeply revered. As the quiet darkness of your room surrounds you, let the images of those ancient temple lakes and the silent, watchful eyes of the sacred giants slowly fade. There's no rush now, no need to hurry. Just the gentle rhythm of your own breath. A calming tide carrying you further into the quiet depths of sleep. The mysteries of the past, so vividly imagined, now transform into whispers, soft and comforting, guiding you towards rest. Allow your thoughts to become as still as the reflection on a moonlit Nile, peaceful and undisturbed. All is calm, all is quiet. You are safe, you are warm, and the echoes of ancient history are now soft lullabies, inviting you to a night of peaceful dreams.